Good afternoon again, everyone. This is Jing Liu from Graduate School of Education, Tohoku University. And thank you so much for everyone to join this very exciting event. The theme of today is rural education in East Asia. At the same time, as the host of this webinar, I would like to introduce the Professor Tomohiro Yakua on behalf of our graduate school to deliver the opening address. So Professor Yakua, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you all. My name is Tomohiro Yakua. I am the Dean of the Graduate School of Education, Tohoku University. Today's webinar is the first webinar of International Webinar Series 2021, hosted by our graduate school. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to express my deep gratitude to everyone who participated in the event. It is a great honor for us to be able to hold this symposium today with such distinguished professors. I would also like to express my gratitude to all the professors who will make presentations on the cases in East Asian countries. Our special thanks go to UNESCO International Research and Training Center for Rural Education, who support and jointly host this event with us. The theme of the webinar is Rural Education in East Asia, Perspectives of Small Schools. This issue is an important theme in relation to the issue of achieving quality of education in the SDGs. Moreover, this issue is also one of the most important pedagogical themes that has been addressed for a long time in Japan. This is a large body of research on this issue in Japan. In post-war Japanese pedagogy, education in rural area initially addressed the issue of how to solve the problems of education in regions with lacking educational conditions. This is based on the assumption that the rural areas are placed in the disadvantageous environment compared with cities. Of course, these problems still exist, and they are becoming more serious with the declining birth rate, aging population, and population decline. However, the distance from cities and the small scale of schools have come to be regarded not only as disadvantages, but also as educational advantages. The Nikkei newspaper published an article titled Educational Migration on October 8th this year. This article describes the effort of local governments to encourage migration from metropolitan areas to rural villages or island regions. According to the article, these local governments are emphasizing distance from cities to encourage migration. Naturally abundant rural environments are beginning to be recognized as a major benefit of education. The ongoing corona crisis has also highlighted the dangers of urban life. Reports have also shown a trend of a population outflow from the Tokyo area to rural areas. The possibility of teleworking and online meeting has led some companies remove their offices in large cities. Nevertheless, the issue of population decline remains a serious problem, especially for rural areas, and there are concerns that population decline will make it difficult for local governments to maintain. This problem continues to be a serious problem in education. Today's webinar is being held in the midst of these two contradictory trends. I would like to conclude my remarks by expressing my hope that today's webinar will be a fruitful meeting in considering education in rural areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yakua. Thank you very much for giving this very inspiring remarks, talking and reviewing the situation of rural development and education in Japan. Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Mr. Robert Paruva on behalf of UNESCO Beijing office to deliver his remarks. Robert, please.
Thank you, Professor Yakua, Professor Dr. Director Zhang, distinguished professors, participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to join your dialogue today. On behalf of UNESCO, I wanted to really appreciate and thank in organizing the two organizers in organizing this very important webinar on rural education. I wish to firstly begin by acknowledging INRULED, UNESCO Category 2 Center, Tohoku University, and all the partner universities to host this very important webinar with the participation of experts from Japan, China, and Republic of Korea. The International Webinar for Rural Education in East Asia Perspectives and the case studies of small rural schools is indeed very timely and aligned with the global platforms UNESCO is currently promoting in the context of SDG 4 localization and implementation, Education 2030 Agenda, Indian Framework for Action, ESD for 2030 Roadmap, Green Skills, Berlin Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development, COP26 Conference on Climate, which will start next week, and the Berlin Framework for Action on Adult Education and Lifelong Learning, and Reimagining Education report to be released by UNESCO on the 10th of November, 2021, by the UNESCO-led Features of Education Commission. This forward-looking global report, education report, will set the benchmark for the future direction of education globally. And this is a landmark report that will build on the 1997 report, Delos report on the pillars of learning, pillars of education, which was also a very landmark global report. Distinguished professors, as you know, UNESCO's global mandate and mission is to build peace, eradicate poverty, and drive sustainable development through education, science, and culture. The social, economic, and environmental dimensions of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is underpinned by the key pillars. People must be at the center of development, prosperity, and partnerships, and protecting our planet. These are the very key fundamental pillars that underpin the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The focus on rural education aligned with 2030 Agenda is the primary focus of discussion by all the stakeholders attending the dialogue today. There are good models and best practices of social and economic development in rural areas in many developing countries. For instance, China had embarked on rural revitalization policy that is basically designed to revitalize and improve the standard of living of people in rural areas in China. China's 2035 Education Modernization Plan or strategic plan is to reform and modernize the current education system. Another success story, as you all know, in China as of 2020, China has eradicated extreme poverty of over 700 million people. At UNESCO, we have always advocated that education is the key to poverty alleviation and empowering rural population to get out of the cycle of poverty. The mission and mandate of Category 2 Center INRULED since its establishment was to promote rural education for sustainable development for many years. And they've done some wonderful research and prepared some good reports on rural education and on a number of related thematic areas. As global trends show, there is a significant proportion of people that live in rural areas and in nearly all the countries and regions. And also, as the Japanese speaker, professor, highlighted, we now also have reverse migration as well. And also migration from rural areas to urban areas, and then from urban areas back to rural areas. So the vision of 2030 agenda is simply to leave no one behind. So we need to ensure that the rural people are taken into consideration in the development agenda. The SDG 4 key domains of access to education, equity in education, inclusive education, quality of education, and lifelong learning are very key fundamental pillars any discussion or dialogue and education must take into consideration. In connection with the seminar on rural education, there should be a focus on the issue of marginalization of rural populations, analyzed from the angle of access, equity, inclusion, issues in rural education. We will share with you today the 2020 Global Education Monitoring Report on education and inclusion. There's it emphasizes on the marginalization and also the number of marginalized groups of people, girls, disabled, etc., that are excluded from education systems and learning processes. So the global report has highlighted some of the key issues of inclusion and education. So we will share with you the summary of the global report, and you can use that for your discussion and for the studies. According to UNESCO statistics, as you know, we still have 730 to 740 million adults and youth that are illiterate and don't have basic functional literacy skills. And millions of children and adults remain deprived of educational opportunities. A significant percentage of that live in rural areas of many developing countries. As poverty and marginalization are the major causes of exclusion in most parts of the world, rural areas of Southeast Asia are facing unprecedented educational challenges regarding social issues such as poverty, migration, unemployment, low birth rate, aging population, etc. The COVID-19 pandemic has added another dimension of challenges and the uncertainties in order to build a resilient, inclusive, and quality rural education systems in our region. In the context of the meeting today, it is my sincere hope that this webinar will focus on rural education, will provide a solid platform for exchange of ideas and experiences on rural education in East Asia, to share the lessons learned, to explore the role of local community, municipalities, provincial governments in the coordination and management of small schools in rural areas, assess the skills and the capacity of teachers, quality and standards for rural schools, incentives and support to education personnel in rural areas, rural school infrastructure, management of rural schools, and the potential leveraging of the power of ICT in rural schools. In concluding, I wish to reaffirm UNESCO Beijing office's solid commitment and support to this initiative to focus on rural education by all the participating universities today. And I look forward to the recommendations and outcome of the dialogue today. I wish you all a very productive and fruitful discussion in the webinar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Parua. And I think you very comprehensively bravely review the UNESCO's mission as well as the commitment regarding to the SDG 4. But at the same time, I think rural education is one part of the SDG 4. And without the achievement in terms of rural education, we cannot completely or fully achieve the SDG 4 by 2030. And I think today, experts and practitioners are sitting together, and we are going to share experiences and to drawing a new picture, discussing the solution for the futures of rural development in East Asia, as well as the Asia Pacific region. Once again, thank you so much. Thank you for your very impressive remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liu. And I'm totally impressed by the warm remarks given by Professor Yakuwa and Robert, especially the good remarks given by Robert on INRULED. So yes, in the time of implementing SDG 4 in this region, I thought rural education is still the key point in implementing SDG 4 in this region. So here, I would like to share some thought, some idea about the experience that China have in the past decades. The topic of the presentation is experienced teacher differentiation in rural education ecological system in China. The topic, we would like to discuss three topics. One is background and the rural education ecosystem. I will give some information about this. And the later two part is Dr. Zhao Tongtong will give her research method and the finding on this. Firstly, the background. The key background of Chinese rural education, I have to say, this is urbanization. So I show the trend of population shift in the past 4 decades. You know, in the beginning of Chinese opening and economic reform, that the total population, mostly of them, live in rural area. So in 1980s, 80% of the population live in rural area. But later, 4 decades pass. In 2018, you can find the figure. Only 40% of the population live in rural areas. What does this mean? This means the total population of the United States have shifted from rural area into urban. So that's the case. The population migrant size is very huge. That means totally population in the United States equally move into urban area. So that's a change in the past 4 decades. Yes, that's the general trend. This chart shows the trend by province. You can find even some area with very low economic growth, like Tibet, Guizhou. Yes, that's also have experienced a huge population migration. That's mean even in Guizhou, Tibet, you know, in 2018, the total population, more than 30% of their population live in urban. And in Guizhou is also one of the poorest province in China. The urbanization rate is also almost reach 50%. That's a trend. Besides the trend, we also can take a close look on the trend. that is migratory bird life. That means in the urbanization, many people who make life in urban area, but back to their hometown in spring festival and in some holidays. So this is another trend at the micro level. So that's we take a closer look on the trend. And if we take a closer look at the migration, and we especially focus on education, we can find many children left behind. So what's the education system response to the children, to the population migration, to the shrinking rural community, to the huge urbanization? It's a challenge, a huge challenge upon the education system. Okay, so everyone can imagine that when 80% of the whole population live in rural area, it's a very, very healthy and very normal, yes, normal community. But what happened when most rural residents moved to cities? What happened when most students live with their grandparents? In the past, most ordinary people believed that economic growth could solve every problem. But now we find economic growth actually brought more problems. That's the situation we faced. Okay, this is a background information I brought into the webinar. So it's a background we discussed. We have to say that in rural education, Japan and Korea advantage piece to compare to China. So China still at the stage of inputting or inviting a qualified teacher into area. We still haven't started our procedure of providing quality education to students in rural area. Maybe, Professor Tamai and Professor Choi discussed the pedagogical approach on education, qualified rural education. But in China case, we still discuss about the qualified teachers. That's as a fundamental element in rural education system. So that's why we focus on the teachers issue instead of pedagogical issue and other things. So that's why we keep focus on qualified teacher in rural education. So that's a response, the first step response toward the population shifting. So that's the information I provide. Thank you for listening. And I give the floor to Dr. Zhao, and she will give the more detailed information.
Thank you so much, Professor Deng, for the solid background introduction. So now move on, I will tell you some empirical research that Professor Deng and I have carried out in Gansu, China this summer. This research is mainly to understand the rural teachers, their personal experiences, and how the shifting ecological system in rural areas has influenced their career development, their differentiations in their career, and how does their professional development go through. So this is a qualitative research. We actually interviewed 18 rural teachers, but we excluded 3 of them because we take them in bulk called experienced teachers. And these are the pictures we took in the school. Maybe just from pictures, you cannot tell it is a rural school. The facilities and the buildings are good, and it's quite similar with the urban areas. But you can see from the last 2 pictures, it's a contrast between the local area and the school. So the school is, the facility is quite good. And the scale, we cannot say it is literally a small scale school because there were 200 teachers and around 3,000 students. But it is definitely small scale if we compare with large schools in the urban areas. the high school there. Those are the interviewee demographic information. I will not go in detail because of the time limitation. So we selected and considered their gender, subject, and length of teaching. Before we move on to present our findings, here is the analysis framework we used for this research. I think many of you must be familiar with the Bruner's ecological system of children's development. He divided the system into microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and a macro coronal system. Here, I replaced the children with teachers and put the key factors like school, family, peer, students into the circle. In that circle, the rural society is in a wider system. Maybe it's a macro system, but I just put it here for convenience. According to our analysis framework, and we had our primary data analysis based on their various valued functioning and their agency. The valued functioning is the things they value but haven't achieved yet, and agency is the ability to act independently and to make their own choices. So we categorize them into 3 groups. The first group of teachers, or the active group agentic group teachers, they will still actively get involved in the teaching, and they value their continuous professional development as teachers. They want to improve their personal skills, and they want their students to have very good achievements. And a very interesting thing we found from this group of teachers is that majority of them are math teacher or the lead teacher. A common character between these 2 group teachers is that they both were fully occupied teachers, because the math teacher in the school, like teacher C has said, she thinks the math is important for the students. It is actually the common value in the school for school leaders, and they distribute more teaching and guiding time for math, because it's a mainstream subject area in the school, and math teachers are more basic compared with other subject teachers. The lead teacher are also fully occupied. They were in charge of the whole class. They need to attend the classroom from early morning, like 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. This 2 group teachers, they are very busy, must be very exhausted, but they still very agentic and actively got involved in. This is a very interesting point to dig out and explore further, and I'll explain no more in here. The second group of teachers are the burnout group. They're shifting their working focus, and they value different things apart from teaching, such as taking care of the family or undertaking the admin work. Like teacher H, he has been shifted his work focus to admin work rather than just focusing on teaching. And the teacher K, he's now paying more attention to his family rather than his students. Those group of teachers are also fed up with the school cultural complex relationship with the school leaders or their colleagues, and they don't like the productive oriented evaluation. And even the students, like teacher K has said, he thinks the students now were no longer like students before. They don't have their own thoughts. They don't hand in their homework, sleep in the classroom, and things like that. So that all those kind of things influence the teachers' feeling, and they just turn into a stage called burnout. The last group of teachers, or peaceful group teachers, those teachers are accepting the current situation as it is without much expectations in their career. This is, in the interview, I just found it's related with their personality as well, because those peaceful teachers also have very peaceful character or personality. And also this is related with the limited resources. Like teacher D said, he said, actually, I wanted to use the ICT facilities, but most of them didn't work. And the school have tried, but they don't have enough money. So he said, it's okay now, I ask for no more. He just accept things as they are. So with this, like a very small small details about teachers' personal experiences, we can see the individuals are in the large systems, and urbanization has been like introduced by Professor Zheng. It's a very key predictor and embedded in the process, influencing teachers and the rural schools. But the further thing is the rural school size actually have not shrunk obviously, at least for this research, because maybe it is because it is a high school in a rural area. It's gathering students from the surrounding villages. So the students' skill is still okay for now. It's not shrinking, but we don't know how long it will remain, and will be always like that. And how about another 10 years with more students move and their family move to the urban areas? But the teachers definitely have been influenced much by the system, by the school culture, organizational culture, the interrelationship with their colleagues, and the students' quality as well. And the limited resources also impose restrictions on teachers' capability development. This leads to our question about how to keep a balance between efficiency and equity, because in our research, we found only 1/3 of the teachers still actively got involved in teaching. How can we create it more like Mr. Robert Parra has said, how to make it more inclusive and teacher-friendly environment for those vulnerable rural teachers? That will be quite key for the development of the rural education. And this is related with our final question that we'd like to discuss with all the speakers and the participants today. So with the continuous urbanization process, how to promote the sustainable development of rural education? And we see it more from a teacher's perspective. We like to know the experiences, the policy frameworks and practices from Korea and Japan. Thank you so much.
I'm going to present my idea for the Korean educational policy for rural small schools. Just like China, we also same kinds of problem. So small populations and small students, it's a big problem for rural educations. Korean government tried to solve the kinds of problems for many years. So I'm going to introduce Korean educational policies for rural small schools. So I'm going to read my paper depending on the PPT. So the contents is such as introduction, the policy to close schools, the policy to save the schools, and conclusion. They are my major ideas. Korean rural schools are very small because of the industrializations. The reason for the rapid decline in the number of students in rural areas in Korea is the industrialization promoted since the 1960s. As factories were built in urban areas due to industrializations and rural population flowed into the city in search of jobs. The rural population rapidly decreased and the number of students decreased, resulting in a large number of small schools. Prior to industrialization, Korean society was an agricultural society where the majority of the population lived in rural areas, and many schools were established to educate their children. As small schools in rural areas increased rapidly, the Ministry of Education promotes a policy to integrate and close these schools. The policy to close schools by integrating small schools in rural areas has been implemented since 1982. 3,855 schools has been closed as of May 1st, 2021. About a quarter of 15,000 schools has been closed. More than 19% of the schools are rural areas. With the closure of many schools in rural areas, rural residents and policymakers who went to revitalize rural areas, pointed out the problems and the closer policies and argued that rural areas will be activated only when rural education is alive. Thanks to this argument, policies to revitalize rural education were promoted. Policy to revitalize rural education was implemented at the government and private level. The Ministry of Education intends to modernize schools in rural areas by providing financial support and to create and revitalize nature-friendly educational conditions. These policies include green schools, year-round care schools, rural excellent high school development project, school group project, and rural study project. The project implemented by the Ministry of Education was activated during the budget support period. But when the budget support was suspended, the project was suspended and rural education could not be continuously activated. On the other hand, the private sector's autonomous rural schools revival project has resulted in teachers voluntarily participating to change school culture, implement various student-centered education to promote parents and students' participation, and continuously revitalize rural education. In this paper, we will examine the policies of Ministry of Education and policies of private sector on rural education policy and seek implication for what meaningful policy to continuously develop rural education. Second, the policy to close schools. There's a major policy of government. As the number of small schools in rural area increase, policy promoted by the government try to close schools. Ministry of Education promote a policy to consolidate small schools, to downgrade branch schools. A school that is difficult to close due to remote control, and an integrated operating schools that combines elementary, middle, and high schools. School consolidation is a kind of integration. Consolidation of schools is a policy that combines schools with two or more schools within the distance from school because of fewer students. Since 1982, the standard for consolidation and operation of schools has been changed according to the year. In the early days, when there were many schools, consolidation standard was set to 180 or less students per schools. The period from 1982 to 1998, in this process, 3,740 schools were merged. Half from merged schools are closed. As many schools in rural areas were closed, criticism were raised that consolidation based on 180 students were not appropriate for rural conditions. And in August 1988, it was adjusted to 100 students. According to this standard, 971 schools were merged. Criticism was raised that this standard was also high. And in 2000, standard for maintaining one school on one district was set to with less than 100 students. Branch school with 20 or less. As the number of students in rural areas continues to decrease, and number of schools that could not maintain 100 increased. This standard rose in 2006 to set 60 or less as a consolidation standard and to maintain the school by correcting local condition and opinion from parents. The school consolidation policy is a policy that closes schools in consideration of school condition, as many schools in rural areas become small due to decreased in number of students. The condition policy has been changed in consideration of the number of students and educational condition in schools. That is a policy strongly promoted by the Ministry of Education to reduce financial resources by emphasizing the efficiency of education. While promoting the policy, there was a backlash from residents and parents, and there were cases where it was unreasonable. In order to revitalize education in rural areas, excessive consolidation and abolition in Korean conditions are no longer desirable. Downgrade the branch schools. It is one of our policies of consolidation or abolition of branch schools. School in area, the number of students in schools meet the criteria for consolidation and abolition. But it is difficult for students to commute to schools due to the distance. Have reorganized schools from this school to a branch school. From 82 to September 2020, 1,854 schools were reorganized into branch schools. Integrated operating school is a school operated by elementary schools, middle schools, and high school, integrating facilities and teachers according to local conditions and under the management of one principles. As of 2021, 122 schools are managed by as integrated operating schools. There are 46 schools run by elementary, elementary and middle schools, and 50 schools run by middle and high school together, and 6 schools run by elementary, middle, and high school together. Training process for elementary and secondary school is different. The certificates are different too, making it difficult to support and cooperate with each other. In particular, the curriculum operation method is centered on the homeroom teachers in elementary schools, the subject teachers in middle school. So it is difficult to interact and support each other. From now, there is another policy. Before policy is close the schools. From now on, the policy to save schools. So one is a green school. Green schools are designed to create an educational environment in which nature and digital technique are harmonized for elementary and middle school in rural areas, deploy excellent manpower, and operate distinctive curriculum to enhance educational power of small rural schools. It aims to create a success model for rural schools where students return through autonomous operation of rural schools and strong links with local residents. Green schools for the Ministry of Education policy implemented for 3 years from 2009 to 2011, and 6 to 20 students of schools were selected from elementary and middle school in rural area. 110 schools of 1,008 schools were selected. So selected schools can establish like advanced e-learning classes. E-learning classes include electronic blackboard, digital textbooks, computer rooms, IPTV were installed in the selected schools, and exceptional regular and after-school curriculums, excellent manpower placement, local resident participation in school programs, and autonomy school recruitment. As a result of the project, students' academic achievement improved. Number of students achieving basic education decreased. The satisfaction of students, parents, and teachers increased. Number of enrolled students increased too. However, after the budget support was suspended, project could not be continued. So this achievement could not be maintained continuously. In addition, out of 1,083 target schools, 110 schools were selected only. That raised the issue of discrimination. Year-round Care School is a project supported by the Ministry of Education to promote a year-round care project to improve educational ability of rural students, considering rural students are struggling with schools and social care. Purpose of the project is to establish a life stability network for rural students, improve basic education, and develop specialties and aptitude to grow into a balanced whole person. The project was carried out for 3 years, so lots of money invested. 378 schools were selected in 2009 and 382 schools in 2010 and 2011. Total of 2,760 schools operate the year-round care school systems. About 33% of 2,298 schools selected benefit. Number of students from 3 schools subject to project must exceed students 200. Looking at the result of the project, academic achievement gradually improvement and the satisfaction of students, parents, and teachers improved by year. Number of enrolled students did not increase, but the reduction rates were lower than that of non-year-round care schools. Outstanding high school promotion projects. The Rural Excellent High School Promotion Project was promoted to prevent students from studying in the city at the level of elementary, high, and high schools by fostering excellent high school in rural areas. It is aimed to narrow educational gap between urban and rural area by creating a foundation for educating children with confidence even in rural areas. The project provides lots of money, so the money is not important, but depend on based on the money, outstanding high school, so improve school facilities and operate various programs to grow into excellent local high schools. As a result, schools, facilities, and environments were improved. Number of enrolled students increased. Rate of attracting excellent new students with grade within 10% were improved. College entrance rate has also steadily increased. Students, parents, teachers, awareness of schools has increased. Satisfaction also improved. A school group project. School group project is a project support small schools in rural areas to jointly operate curriculum. It is a project to support schools by combining them into one group so that each school can have a curriculum that is difficult to do with the neighboring schools. Because school is small, the project was improved over 2 years in 2006 and 2007. So lots of money was invested. Support expenses were jointly used by schools selected as a school group. This project was promoted to increase the efficiency of education by jointly operating programming, cooperating with local small schools. Through this project, it helped operate the curriculum that could not be carried out because it was small, allowed various field trips, provide opportunities for students in school group to cooperate and interact. Studying in rural areas is a support project promoted by the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs to promote rural education while studying in rural areas. Rural studies, which were operated by the private sectors, has been changed from 2010. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. Ministry of Agriculture began to support rural study project to revitalize rural education through urban students' rural life and rural school experience. Project is promoted to expand urban and rural exchange, foster personality, revitalize small rural schools on the verge of closure due to a decrease in number of students. Former rural community, although it was contributed to overcoming the crisis of closing small schools and revitalizing aging rural areas through the rural study project, it has been pointed out that it has not been systematically operated because it is operated by the project private sector. It is meaningful as a way to revitalize rural education. But for this, legal regulation and systematic operation model need to be presented. Private policy. The private policy is to revitalize small schools in rural areas by solving the educational problems of schools without budget support. Representative policy is saving small school policy. This can be said to be a movement to revitalize small school rather than policies. Namhansan Elementary School played a leading role in saving small schools. Many schools, including Dasan Elementary Schools in Chungnam, Sam Elementary School in Jeollabuk-do, operate schools that have changed the education with the same sort as Namhansan Elementary Schools and transformed schools in crisis into regular scale schools. Namhansan Elementary School was designated as a closed school in 2000 because number of students was 26. When Namhansan Elementary School was designated as the target of closure, teacher, parents, and local residents joined forces to make effort to save the schools. The first of attempt is the democratic operation of schools. In response to this, teachers adopt block class time system with 80 minutes classes, 30 minutes break, from 40 minutes class, 10 minutes break, and organize curriculum to the various activities according to the level of students. Curriculum was reorganized around the need of students. Students were encouraged to actively participate in educational activities by creating an autonomous school culture of education. Through the agreements of principal, teachers, parents, local residents, school has been transformed into a regular school with more than 130 students attending. Case of Namhansan Elementary Schools is the model for revitalizing small schools in Korea. And many rural small schools are revitalizing small schools by applying Namhansan model. And the project promoted since 2003 has been maintained and developed until now. In order to revitalize small schools in rural areas, it is expected to achieve better results if the government and private policy cooperate. In order to promote sustainable projects, efforts are needed to support projects voluntarily promoted by the private sectors so that projects necessary in the field can be carried out according to autonomous fields.
I am director of Research Institute for Remote and Small School Education in Chicago University of Education. I can't speak English. Positioned as a historical development of remote and small school education in Japan, and percentage of remote schools. In 2019, the number of schools designated as remote schools in Japan was 3,367 elementary schools and 1,382 junior high schools, accounting for 14.6% of the total. In Japan, small schools are defined as schools with 11 or less classes, which account for 45% of total. In Japan, the population is declining rapidly and being created and abolished, but the number of small schools is increasing. By 2030, elementary schools with 120 or less students are expected to account for 80% of the total. To historical development of remote education in Japan and the act on promotion of education in remote areas. One characteristic of remote areas from the post-war period to 1980 are largely different between cities and remote areas, such as income affected disparities in school teaching materials and tools. The characteristics of remote areas at that time were generally pointed out 6 points. Disadvantage of natural conditions, remoteness, economic poverty, cultural stagnation, society and educational such issues, living environment of remote areas have widened the social development after high economic growth. On the other hand, the development of social infrastructures after Japan's high economic growth in the 1980s rapidly expanded to remote areas. And since 1985, the development of social infrastructure in terms of traffic, information, and culture has expanded. The remoteness and social blockage have become extremely weak. In urban areas, programs of urbanization, such as deterioration, living environment due to overcrowding, arrangement of human relations, soaring housing costs, and intensifying competitive society have been pointed out. For this reason, remote education has come to be recognized not only as a means of raising delayed education, but also as a means of developing distinctive educational activities that take advantage of small numbers of people, natural conditions, and regional characteristics. In recent years, rural infrastructure development and income levels have not been high. Efforts to promote educational development that take advantage of the positive aspects of educational development are establishment, philosophy, and the characteristics of the act of promotion in both areas. One equal opportunity for educational act from remote areas. In Japan, the act of promotion of education in remote areas was enacted in 1945 with the aim of eliminating the gap between cities and remote areas. The act of promotion of education in remote areas definition of remote schools is defined as public elementary and junior high schools located in mountainous areas, remote islands, and other areas that are not blessed with traffic conditions and natural, economic, and cultural conditions. Article 1 of the Act of Promotion of Education in remote areas aims to clarify various measures that must be implemented to promote education in remote areas based on equal opportunities for education and to improve the level of education in remote areas. Municipalities mission to promote remote education include materials and tools for remote schools, training for teachers working in remote schools, housing, instruction, welfare for faculty and staff, facilities for music and physical education, health management for students, measures to facilitate community communicating to students describe. In addition, young teachers tend not to go to schools, but it is important for teachers to settle in remote areas and improve their qualification. For that reason, the Act of Promotion of Education in remote areas describes training opportunities and guarantees for remote teachers and remote area allowances for teachers. As for the mission of prefectures to support this, Article 4 states that necessary research should be conducted on the learning guidance, teaching material, teaching tools, suitable for the special circumstances of education in remote areas. It also states that a training facility for teachers working in remote schools is established. These articles are intended to ensure the equality of quality of education by consciously improving educational conditions and improving the qualifications of teachers, which are difficult to guarantee because of the remote areas. As mentioned above, the remote education promotion law solved the remote and establish conditions for equal opportunity in education by emphasizing efficiency and to promote consolidation and abolition of schools. However, the remoteness of remote areas has already been resolved, and there are conditions that help the goodness of remote areas, such as use of regional characteristics under their circumstances. The philosophy of promotion law is a equal opportunity to receive the regardless of any region or condition, and it's linked to the basic education philosophy of the fundamental of education. Therefore, observing remote education promotion law promotes development of new educational activities and shifting educational of small group instruction, introduction of payment, creator learning activities, and introduction of communication activities, overcoming the challenge remote schools and education that they characteristics of remote schools. The three characteristics of remote schools in Japan. One, smallness, two, there is agriculture and nature that is different from the small ones in the city. And three, close relationship between school and communities. Two, utilization of small school and regional characteristics. The advantages of taking advantage of small school characteristics are as follows. One, it is easy to form a relationship of trust between teachers and children. Two, it is easy to create relationship of different ages and generations. Three, it is easy to provide learning and lifestyle guidance that matches the level of achievement of children. It is easy for children to collaborate and work together. It is easy to create a curriculum to make use of local materials. It is easy for all children to have a role. It is easy to incorporate nature experience and agricultural experience as learning. It is easy to carry out public activities and volunteer activities in cooperation with the local community. It is easy to teachers to communicate with each other. Difference and native aspects between remote schools and large schools. On the negative aspects of small schools, one, there are things that can only be done by a large number of people. Two, it will be a close relationships. Three, since children and teachers tend to have a familiar relationship, it is difficult for society to be formed. For communication, skills may not improve. On the other hand, in the classical scale is large, it does not mean that society can be achieved. And in a large group, human relationship may become rather strange. Furthermore, if one cannot truly open one's heart, it often induces formal cohesiveness, formal conformity, deep distrust, withdrawal, and immobilizations of friends. Among a large number of people, there are many formal relationships and manual relationships. Human relationships develop only informed by developing formalistic and formal conformity. But on the contrary, it is not possible to trust human beings and friends. Rather, it cannot be said that human relations and sociality have improved without deep respect and trust for the other person, which goes beyond the manual. On the other hand, in remote small schools, there is also familiarity. Normally, if you don't have the basics of greetings, only fix of human relationship, and so on, it seems that there is no sociality in an instant. If you are conscious of overcoming this familiarity, it will be able to create a truly reliable society in a small number of relationships. Two, school management of remote small schools that foster children's sociality, language and communication skills. One class management that makes user relationship and sociality of different ages. In remote small schools in Japan, we are promoting the following in order to overcome familiarity and acquire sociality. One make use of different age groups called partially, vertically divided groups. Give children clear roles and responsibilities. Avoid using familiar speech in discussions. Have children think and act on their own. Change the communication style to formal. Local research activities, experience activities, local events. Utilize the daily relationship and communication between local adults and children. Regional education to discover the goodness of the area, remote small schools. Effective educational activities utilize local resources. Education that makes the most of local resources is being activity adopted at remote schools in Japan. Children in remote areas are no longer proud of their area. So remote schools are incorporating community activities that make them proud of their area as educational activities. It is important to increase pride in the community by conducting comprehensive learning and community contribution activities that make the most of the community in remote schools. In the educational effects of utilizing the area are so follows. From the knowledge learned in textbooks, it is possible to enhance ideas for opening up real society and life. Children can acquire the independence and ability to act to improve the community. Children can recognize the depths of reality in society. Children can understand the meaning of social and public things through the community. Compared with remote areas, it is possible to grasp the universal issues that exist throughout Japan. Knowledge and labor work can be unified. It is possible to foster regional understanding and community pride through local industry and culture. This content is not a conventional view of academic ability that emphasizes knowledge, but the creative ability to write by discovering problems and acting independently on problems. In this way, it is required to develop new qualities and abilities. For that purpose, it is required to train teachers who can know the goodness of remote schools and develop the characteristics of remote schools merit. Thank you.
Please allow me to invite Professor Philip Roberts from University of Canberra to share his comments as well as some discussions for us. Thank you. Hi, Philip, please.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Thank you, Professor Yakua and Mr. Palmer for hosting today's event. It's been a great pleasure to listen to the presentations and to learn about the various countries, China, Japan, and Korea, and rural education in these contexts. I'm going to respond by thinking about the rural education field internationally that's primarily represented in the English language literature. And a lot of what has been talked about today reflects what is normal across many countries on the globe. issues around population decline, aging populations, economic decline, attracting professionals, etc. And then some of those issues that relate to schooling, like access to schooling, achievement results, students leaving, etc. So that's a very common theme that was reflected across all of the presentations, which again reflects what we know in the literature and in the global reviews that have happened, like the UNESCO review a few years back and so forth. People that study rural education, like yourselves, tend to focus on the issues that again were reflected in the talks today. They're often looking at or motivated by difference in educational outcomes for rural kids. And they're concerned about people accessing a full curriculum, or they're really interested in place-based education. And we had a few talks about the pedagogical approach and linking the school curriculum here today. School closure is a big issue in Europe and in many parts of the world, and was in all of our talks. And we also get into issues like access and the staffing issue, like the China talk, but also who are rural populations and what is the social composition there? And that was maybe a little bit represented, I think, in the Japan talk in Japan today. Usually we try to fix these or try to address them because we're thinking about the equity for these people, or we're looking at developing the regions or developing the population characteristics from these people. And again, we saw some of these reflected in our presentations today. And we heard some of the things that are working. And some of the things that are working are the same as what are working internationally. So linking curriculums to rural places. So letting teachers make that meaning for children, because that's how then we assess their achievement and their later school outcomes. The idea of a rural pedagogy came up, and that's been talked about a lot in the literature of late. Networked schools. So we talked about the couple of examples we had of sharing resources, both physically, but also using internet technologies. I didn't hear a little bit from China talk about training teachers, and in particular in America and Australia, especially training teachers to work in these schools has been a big focus. And some of the things like incentives, so pay and conditions. But a common theme that's often overlooked, and this is what Mr. Palmer was talking about at the beginning, was the need to develop rural regions. This is about the economic development of communities. And if we don't develop the regions that these schools are in, then they're going to remain somewhat marginalized. Now, this is really interesting and important when we live in a world that is mostly urban now. And this is only a recent phenomena, largely driven in the last while by China's rapid urbanization that we heard about. The statistics there of the population of the United States moving from the country to the city in the last 30 years is quite an amazing figure. But that changes what we think is normal and what we think the standard life experience or what we value is. I think this is where rural education can really come to a specific focus, because often we look at the rural as part of urbanization, as Schuck-Smith and Brown have written, and we think of the move to the city as a normal part of modernity, but it changes the lived experience of the human population, and it changes what we think the normal experience is. And that requires us to really think about what do we value and what is it we want to see changed. One thing we often don't engage with is the definition of what we mean by rural. So rural is a word that has been given to these places that are not the city, usually by the city. Okay. A lot of people in rural regions don't call themselves rural. Okay. It's a word we give them. And what does it mean? Well, we often define it in terms of educational outcomes using statistics, or we define it locationally from somewhere else, or we define it by population density or how many people live there compared to somewhere else. So we tend to focus on things like statistics and measures. What we overlook often is in the field of rural studies, there's multiple definitions that are used. And some of these are about culture and value, theoretical notions of what it is to be and be a human being, what it is to live and have meaning. If we think of it in our rural populations, what is it to have a rural culture compared to a non-rural culture? And what do we want to change and what don't we want to change? We need to think about, when we just look at results or differences, we're using only one method, we're using usually a number method, and we're sort of overlooking the meaning making. And it's the meaning making then where we engage in education. What do we value? How do we do that? There's been a lot of work in rural education in the last couple of years, particularly in the English language medium. We have a few books here. Most of these are published in about the last 18 months. So one from Canada, one from Europe, One's got international, some international chapters here. We've had some chapters in there, on a couple of there on China particularly. A new handbook in America. These are the English language journals, where there's not a lot from the context that we've heard about today. And the book over here by Emily Hannum, Jared Pastiglione, and Peggy Kong, looking at China with a lot of Chinese co-authors. It's probably the only major work that's been coming at this from an East Asian perspective. So there's a really big gap. Okay, there's a couple of chapter in this one, the rural education one, with a couple of colleagues of mine from China and myself, but there's a big gap in the literature. So this seminar is really exciting about thinking, how can we speak back to this domination of what we understand rural to be, which comes from a Western global metropole perspective, and how can we bring the experiences of East Asia region to the rest of the world? Because quite frankly, the global north, as we might call it, hasn't solved rural education. And there are still areas that are marginalized, students are not achieving as well, and the areas that are declining. So we can't look for solutions or ideas there. What we can look for is ideas that haven't worked and new theoretical tools. And in the countries that we've heard today, the change from rural to urban has been rapidly evolving in more recent times. So we can observe these changes and we can make actual interventions, and we can learn from these contexts in a way that will change and help the rest of the world from the Asia method out. A couple of thoughts there are things like, there's a lot of work happening around the global south, de Souza Santos and others. Ideas of southern theory, spatial and epistemic justice, Asia as method, as Dr. was talking with me earlier. And so there's a whole lot of contributions that this group and others can make about understanding what it is to be rural in the world, but also understanding what it is to educate rurally and what it means to work in and work for rural schools. Because we can't have only one major book in the literature, in the English language literature, that is, from this perspective. And I think when we look at some of these translations that are starting to come out, Pei Xiaotong's famous book there, is really a great philosophical tradition of Chinese sociology, which brings a whole nother perspective on what it is to change societies. And this is the great opportunity that we have with the people that we've had here today. Only last comment I would make is I found one thing Dr. Damai was talking about there, with the teachers and students being familiar with each other, and that potentially being an issue to limit the engagement with developing sociality and so forth. It's a really interesting point of difference to the common theme internationally, where a lot of scholars will go look back at rural schools and go, that one of the best things they have is that close connection with kids and communities, and knowing each other well and having that relationship. Because they talk about in urban areas the loss of relationships, because urban areas are not all wonderful. They often have high crime rates, poor economic issues, etc. So there's a real interesting theoretical point there, try to tease out what is the influence, perhaps culturally, on that understanding, and what can that contribute as well. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much for this very inspiring comments and reflection about what we just shared in this afternoon. And personally, I'm very impressed by the comments you mentioned about how to think about the alternative approach, like from our Asian or the Eastern perspectives, to understand the rural development and rural education, and how to, in contrast to the Western ideas and perspectives, and how to really share the experiences and find common solutions for the sustainable rural development and rural education. Probably is one of the key discussion we can have in today's seminar. Thank you very much, Robert. Do you have any questions to the presenters for the discussion?
I guess my main question was probably framed around Dr. Tamai's issue, or question there around the sociality and knowing the students. I'd be really, I think that's a real point of difference. So I'd be interested in if you could explain that a little bit more, and then I'd be interested to hear our colleagues from Korea and China how they see that issue, because that seems a particularly distinct, maybe different interpretation that's coming through.
Thank you very much for your question. Well, so we need to think about how we should deal with sociality, how we should develop sociality between teachers and students. Is it a matter of close trust, and or is it just talking about the formal thing, like greeting each other appropriately? So this can make a great difference. In Japan, we often talk about the formal sociality, such as being able to greet each other. And aside from what we actually feel, we try to actually establish our formal attitudes to each other. But this is quite effective on business, but I'm not sure whether we could actually trust each other. Therefore, it's very important for us to express our true feelings, and so that we can gain trust and we can develop an actual trustful relationship with each other. This is what we need to work on in Japan. And I think we can learn a lot from the rural education. So we would like to inform this important point to the education industry as a whole. That's all. Thank you.
That's very interesting, because it's the movements in psychology and classroom management and student sense of belonging and agency in many parts of the world is about reducing formality and making them feel more sense of belonging. So it's a very interesting difference in some respects there. I'd be interested in hearing what the thoughts of our colleagues from China and Korea are on this topic.
Okay, thank you very much. I benefit a lot from this presentation. I find, widen my view on rural education, both experimentally and physically. I thought maybe Japan case is provide a very different pattern for the future education. Maybe in the future China move and yes, it's a harmony society, and people, both parents and students, take advantage of the positive aspect of rural education, and they thought maybe the best they can take advantage of them of rural education. That's fantastic. Maybe in the future it's a destination of our human society, just like Phillips addressed. More than half of the population live in urban, but we also face the challenge and of great pressure of urbanization life. So I think Professor Tamai provided me a very good example that they changed the concept. Maybe this is the target SDG strategy addressed. And in Korea cases, they provide that both government and civic society, they put effort to improve the rural education. So it's amazing that we believe that in rural education market failure, market, there's no space for market. But Professor Choi said there is still some space for privatization, and volunteer NGO and the civic activity can play a very important role in this area. So I really, benefited from this. In China, we also find that the NGO and some volunteer organizations have already play a very important role in rural areas. So the local government feel, they have no measure to improve the quality of education in rural school, but some volunteer organization can do something for in this region. So thank you very much. We already have some silo in Chinese rural education. And I think Philip also, deepened our understanding of rural education, what this means, and what was the value system existed in this innovation and initiative. Thank you very much. I benefit a lot from this. Thank you.
I feel quite similar with Professor Zhang. I learned quite a lot from the cases from Korea and from Japan, the things that they have done. We might have not think that way from China, or maybe just me myself, but what they have done really inspired us. And also Professor Philip also give us some reflection from more academic review. That's also very good. And I think it is like the rural education, or like in the UK, it's quite similar. It is still a challenge, like the global north and south, we're all facing this problem. But I do think what Korea and Japan, the practice they've done really inspired us. But following that up, I do have two small questions for Professor Choi and Professor Tamai. So for Professor Choi, I really interested in to know how the private sectors can play their role in the rural education. So to what extent can they get involved in, and their governmental support or policies for that? And for Professor Tamai, the question is, you mentioned about changing the way of thinking and about remote education, but I think it's quite good, but I don't know whether it's any practical things you have done in this kind of way, or trying to change their thinking, any practical actions. Thank you.
All right, so okay, thank you for your questions. Well, there's a private sector. It's not the only, there's not the private sector. There's a kind of public sector. Teachers who are working in the public schools are joining voluntarily to change the culture, teaching method, and changing curriculums, not directed by the government. Usually, Korean government try to innovate our education by government side. It's like a top-down. So Ministry of Education direct some policies to teachers and schools. It's totally different from the side. Teachers are voluntary and autonomously, they change the schools, curriculums, teaching method, depending on themselves. There's a big difference, not from the top side, but from the teachers' bottom side. There's autonomous. So like empowerment, there's a big difference. So teacher like to change their culture, teaching method. There's a student-centered teaching. It's a big difference. So they choose their styles, teaching method, and curriculums, any kinds of method. So there's a big difference. So, well, I was so impressed to be the kinds of schools. Teachers are very alive. So that's a little different from the government side educational policy. Well, that's my answer.
Am
I speaking? Well, here in Japan, we have the central government and the municipal government, and people think that there is a big gap between the big cities, metropolitan Tokyo, and the rural cities. And because Tokyo is in the center, when we say central government, people easily tend to think about Tokyo. And both the teachers and students too, they believe, they have this bias that things are far advanced in the cities and far behind in the remote areas. So when a teacher is being assigned in a rural area, they think that they have been degraded and demoted. And just take an example of a human being. it depends on if you think that person is a very noisy person or quiet person. Well, this is being decided by the person who looks at that person. So we have to think on how we have to perceive this education system. So everyone is super biased that the remote education is bad. That tends to be the tendency, but just like we look at other people, we have to change the assessment measures and assessment KPIs for education. And we must be able to see the good parts, the sunny sides of the rural education, because it allows participatory learning. And by stressing these points, more students or more teachers will be seeing the brighter side of the remote and rural education. And we will start to see the potential of taking the advantage of the rural education out. Even if we don't have the advanced technology, we can come up with good points. That is something we have to continue to stress to others.
Okay, people that ask, okay, I'm going to say my opinion about the webinar. Okay, I heard your presentation, Tama and Jane and Chao. It was good experience, and I learned a lot from Japan and China. It was good experience, but even though I present my idea, just I think about myself. Just Korean government and I have been trying to solve the actual problems confronting at the rural areas. But when I heard that Philip's presentations, I think in more. The theoretical background is more important. What's the difference? What's the gap between rural and urban? Is that depending on the geographically, statistically, or any other? Well, why? What is the difference between two areas? So you think in more. Is there a real difference? So probably there's not a difference. It might be not a difference. So we think a different side, but you can find another way to educate rural areas. So thank you for Philip's recommendations.
So this is the comment I wanted to make in response to both of those was we have this as Tamai said, this spatial imaginary, and we imagine center and periphery, when for a lot of people in rural regions, the center is the periphery because it is remote from them. If I think of people in Western China, Beijing, or Southern Korea to Seoul, etc. But I think the really interesting question there that's come up in terms of rural regions and developing is, if what we value in education is often governed by university study from these academic disciplines, which are really important for economic growth and development, but we also have to live, and people have to live in places. So we're valuing a form of knowledge that doesn't always suit people who want to live in certain places, or to grow agricultural industries in an innovative way, because they don't have the knowledge of those places. So we actually have a problem of educating out the very things that we might need to grow the future, because all our innovation isn't only in some of those areas. That's super important, but there's also the need to feed people, to live in places, to look after the land, but we don't include that enough. So there is a curriculum question here. There's a knowledge question here that we can probably engage with as well. Thank you.
I have a question. As we know, Japan, Korea, and China, all of us have a very powerful government. It's very helpful to ensure that students in rural area can get equal opportunity to get education. And like Professor Tamai said, in Japan they have a very influential teachers rotation. system, and China now is also trying to introduce the teachers' rotation system to ensure the students in this region, they have equal access to education. But on another side, in 2012, the theme of Teachers' Day in United Nations, the theme is taking the strength of teachers. So then we feel a dilemma. One is a strong government want to implement and ensure that students get equal access to education, and they introduce teachers' rotation. So some teacher was assigned. This is a responsibility, not only economic incentives. But on the another side, UNESCO, ILO, they said we should consider the situation from the perspective of teachers and take the teachers' stand. So Philip and Robert, both you outside the Japan, Korea, and China, what's your aspect on this dilemma? That's my question.
I think we have governments that are powerful in sort of maybe different ways because they control the money. So, when you control the money, you have a lot of control. We have systems where teachers have to go work in the country before they can transfer back as a way of encouraging them and these sort of things. But I think the challenge is, there's a lot of very similar discussion points between particularly us and China. I'm more familiar with the context of China myself, but than Japan and Korea, which I've been learning about today. I think it comes down to, when we look at improving education, the question is, what do we mean by that? Is it literacy and numeracy skills, which are very important, but how do we measure them? So what are the examples that the students are responding to in their questions in numeracy and literacy? Are they questions that rely on knowledge of the city? Because if they are questions that rely on a knowledge of living somewhere else, then that's not a very good question. But we have those problems here quite a lot. And the same with other forms of senior curriculum, the students finishing. So if we can be smart, like we can still test literacy and numeracy or knowledge, but we can use different modes to do that, different examples that represent the knowledge that the kids have with the same underlying principle. So we can get more complex in our assessment systems. I think we do a one-size-fits-all test. Every child across the country does a literacy and numeracy test on the same day with the same test. And that's a measure, but the measure itself is part of the problem. So I think it comes down to how smart we can be of our assessment systems and not just do the very quick and easy approach. Because when we talk about improving, well, there has to be a problem. So how do we define that problem to then improve? And sometimes we create more of a problem in doing that than actually solving it. Would be how I would respond.
I start with my summary point. So I will answer the question of Dr. Zhang. Well, I can quickly respond to what Dr. Zhang has highlighted. From UNESCO standpoint, we have the old existing instruments, global instruments, the 1966 UNESCO ILO recommendation concerning the status of teachers. We have a technical advisory board that looks at teachers' conditions and teacher policy issues. And also, if some teachers are discriminated or mistreated, then the international panel reviews or looks into some of the complaints that are laid. But overall, the 1966 recommendation covers the teachers at primary and basic level. And the 1997 recommendation covers the teachers at the tertiary level and university level. So we basically provide to governments what are some of the policy aspects that they have to integrate it into the teacher policy. That will ensure that teachers' conditions are paramount. The conditions of service for teachers must be looked into. So for UNESCO, we advocate from that angle, from what we call a normative instrument standpoint, to encourage the governments to ensure that they must have comprehensive policies, teacher policies, to address some of the issues on teachers' conditions and terms of service, etc., etc. So that's what UNESCO had been doing for all these years for teachers at basic level as well as at the university and tertiary level. But these instruments are not what we call binding because they are not conventions. In the United Nations, you see, when the government signs a global instrument convention, that is legally binding. The recommendations are non-binding, so sometimes the government fully complies with the key provisions of the recommendation. Sometimes they don't. So that's where we are at the moment. Okay, so I think Philip has really comprehensively summarized a lot of very good points. I will not repeat. I think I'll pick some of the points that probably he has missed. As I said in my speech, I think the presenters, thank you for all the presenters. Rural education, I think, is a very important topic or agenda or thematic area for discussion. And the UN agenda now, what we are promoting now is called LNOB, Leaving No One Behind. So I think your rural education agenda now fits right into this LNOB agenda of the entire United Nations system, not UNESCO only. So that is the premise of the entire work that United Nations is now doing in every country to ensure that leaving no one behind framework. We even now developing, United Nations now developed even a framework on leaving no one behind, so that rural, urban, disadvantaged areas or populations must be fully taken on board in the development agenda. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development puts people at the center of development. So I think the academics are really touching on rural education. It's really targeting the rural population, and I think that's a very welcome initiative to sharpen the focus on rural education. As I said earlier, you see the key pillars are people, prosperity, partnerships. I think in all your presentations you have addressed that. And the planet is basically talking about the environmental dimension of the Sustainable Development Agenda. Overall, they are underpinned by, as I said, the social, economic, environmental, and UNESCO, we have added what is called the cultural dimension of sustainable development. And I think in your presentations, you have addressed that. Very quickly on the feedback on all the presentations, I think you have really highlighted what UNESCO really advocates in all the member states. That's having a sound, solid policy framework to address rural education. And I think you have really highlighted that. And I think I take the view of Dr. Choi from Korea that sometimes it's imposed down. But UNESCO, we tell the governments that when you are designing education policies, you must ensure it must be consultative. That there must be, all stakeholders must be fully on board and engaged in the discussion of a new education policy, so that it must be seen as a bottom-up driven policy agenda that everybody is on board on the same page. So I think, Dr. Choi, you're very correct in highlighting that some of the policy agendas are driven from the central level down. So we have some opposition, rejection. But overall, I think for a very important area like rural education, it must be guided by a very sound policy and a strategic framework by the Ministry of Education. So I think you have really highlighted that. On the issues of access to education, equity issues, on the inclusion issues, on the quality of education, I think in all your presentations, and lifelong learning, you have really highlighted some aspects of that. And this is really the SDG 4 agenda. It's basically looking at access issues in education, equity issues in education, inclusion, quality of education, and lifelong learning. And the other additional dimension is the outcome of rural education. It is very important. The students must acquire the necessary knowledge and skills for employment as well as to be productive in society. So I think that was highlighted in all your presentations. I think the teacher part, I think Philip has highlighted that. I think the important aspect is the incentives for teachers in rural areas. I think China has highlighted that, and in your work and further studies, I think we carefully need to look at what are some of the incentives being provided to rural teachers. I think that's a very, very important aspect. You have all highlighted the importance of public-private partnerships, which is also a United Nations 2030 pillar on partnerships. I think that's a very excellent indication of engaging the private sector in reforming as well as improving the quality of rural schools. You have also highlighted in your presentation the multi-sectoral aspects of it. Bring the environment ministry, the agriculture ministry, the education ministry, even the health ministry. So I think the multi-sectoral aspect and multi-ministerial agenda or factor into the rural school focus is a very important dimension, and I think you have highlighted. The other aspect, I think, very important, it must be data-driven. We need statistics and data on the rural schools, the teachers, etc., etc. So every the initiative or studies that you are undertaking now, we must really have very solid evidence to really argue with policymakers on whatever gain that we want to get out on really contributing to rural education. I think the role of parents and community has been emphasized by the presenters, but I think it is very critical for the parents to play a very critical role in rural education, in rural areas. So I think it's a very important dimension. Sustainability of the projects and initiatives, I think, has been highlighted by a few of the speakers. So if there are certain initiatives and platforms and projects you are initiating for rural education, you must ensure that they are sustainable. All the sustainability factors must be taken into consideration. I did not hear a little bit on the remote learning and some of the distance education programs in the context of COVID-19. So as you know, in many of the developing countries, when COVID-19 struck, the rural schools were basically shut because there is no infrastructure to provide online learning, distance learning, etc. So we can discuss that in another time. I think classroom management was mentioned, is very important. I like the other point on the green schools. I think that fits into the overall global agenda that I talked about, COP26 on climate change, UNESCO's global agenda on education for sustainable development, green schools, green jobs, etc. So I think it's very important to also have some rural schools focus on the green aspects of it. And we, UNESCO and many, the UN Environmental Agency have a lot of publications and reports on that. So we can be able to capitalize on that. Lastly, the global reports that UNESCO had engineered and that has set the global agenda for education. We started that in 1972 with the Edgar Forey report on learning to know. We will share with you all of them if you want to align that with the rural schools or rural education focus. The second very important landmark report was the Delos report on learning the treasure within, with the 4 pillars of learning. 4 pillars of learning: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. So you should look at from the 4 pillars, how they are applied in the rural context, how they are fully embraced from a rural education angle as well. Then the 2015 report, UNESCO-led global report, was on rethinking education. Rethinking education. Are we doing the right things now? Is learning okay? The learning outcome, everything was assessed from the fundamental rethinking of our current education systems in all our countries. So that throws a lot of questions to educators and experts to look at what is the current landscape of education system, how we can restructure, reform our education system. I will share that with you. The 2021 report on the features of education will be released on the 10th or launched on the 10th of November. I will send you so that you can listen into the discussions and the launching of the final report, as well as some of the key recommendations. And you can look at from the angle of rural education, what the features of education report has highlighted, and how we can even organize our next seminar on features of education. And we can bring one of the international commission members to come and give us make a presentation on some of the key issues and findings that were presented in the global report that is coming up on the 10th of November. So I think overall, your agenda is a very welcome. UNESCO Beijing, we fully 100% behind you. If you wish to publish a publication, we will also allocate some funding for that. So you can discuss, and then you can get back to me next year, and we can look at how we can find. We can even make that as a UNESCO publication. We can pull together all the case studies and maybe one from Australia as well. Philip can also contribute something. And then we can have a UNESCO publication that would be launched as an official UNESCO publication that we are very willing to hear from all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert, for your very comprehensive reflection on the presenters' presentations, as well as our discussants' comments and reflections. And also, I really appreciate you to linking the global framework of sustainable development goals and also the global education reforms with the rural context discussions. And one reflection from my side is we discuss a lot of like global agenda, global global reforms. But on the other hand, I think the current education reform is also deeply influenced by another pillar of education reform, is a neoliberalism-based education reform. And I think either China, Japan, or Korea, parents, principals, schools are all under the pressure from the so-called standardization of education on the students as well as on the teachers as well. But how to help our students and teachers in rural schools escape from this kind of influences? How to keep them away from this catch-up mindset of education? I think it's another big challenge for us to consider. And it's another perspective for us to achieve the sustainable education development by 2030 or beyond. Okay, once again, thank you so much for everyone.
Dr. Liu, very important comment you made about standardization there. Because if we think about it, is standardization based on an urban view?
Yeah,
What if we standardize based on a rural view? Who would be behind?
exactly. Thank you. I think Robert raised a new project for us. We can probably work together to write a book together.
We will work together to implement this publication project. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.